The reason that I play it again tonight is that it signifies a structure that is inherent to the consciousness and the process, if you wish to call it that, or the map, if you will, of the logic of liberation. So it's useful to understand this, let's call it the Zen dialectic, as an intellectual pathway from the false self to the real. So, using the formula of the song. So we have a dialectic, a thesis, the negation of that thesis, and then the negation of the negation. So first there is an ego, and you believe you are that ego, and that ego is made up of a thought representation of the real self. Ramana calls that the I thought, but it's only a concept in the mind. And the ego is a concept that contains both a subject and a predicate. So it's the predicate that creates the difficulties. And it's only when you negate, first off, both the subject and the predicate of the egoic assertion that basically, I am Joe or John or Devadatta or Xi Jinping or whatever, but I am a particular entity in the world, right? I am not some formless blob of mental disturbance, let's say, or just mental passivity. No, I am a person in the world, and I have a purpose, and I have a will, and I have desires, and I have all kinds of things, because the ego projects a world that it will try to satisfy its sense of lack of real being, because it is only a representation of the self. So the problem is that the ego is desperate to affirm its reality. That's what the ego wants to do, to affirm itself, to prove I am somebody, and I'll do something special, and I'll make the world better, and they'll remember me, and there'll be a statue of me in the central square, and right, et cetera, or whatever is the version of it. I'll make a hit record, or I will, write the great Costa Rican novel, or, I will do something that will bring a sense of fulfillment to life. Maybe I'll just make my mother happy, but I'll do something that will prove that I'm worthy and that I'm on the side of the rightness and the goodness, and I can accept myself, and I can let go of all this self-loathing and victimization and anger and all of that one day, once I'm recognized and adored, right? So there's the ego's plan of attack on its own dream field. In order to reach the real self, you cannot affirm that ego. You have to negate it. And that's the one thing that the ego will not allow. But if you recognize that your ego is in fact a fictional character that you've created, and that you've created it out of the debris of the experiences of childhood and traumas and projections and all of the various uncertainties that have caused you to develop an attitude and ego defenses and a frame of reference and a belief system, et cetera, all of that has to be recognized as not who you are, and not even a real world, but a fantasy world projected onto the world, and you make every effort you can to try to make that fantasy come true. But there's always disappointment, because the real one and your imaginary will never be the same. The imaginary will never be the same as the real, and the imaginary, without the benefit of symbolic self-critique that recognizes it's imaginary and delusional, will never allow you to escape from its labyrinth. You will always be trying to find that place or those people who recognize you and who will give you the power and the authority and the perks and whatever it is that will make you feel like you've made it, and now you can rest on laurels that have been earned. But they can never be earned because you depend on the other to validate you. And it's that dependency that's the ego's problem. Because even if you make that hit record, then they're going to say, well, where's the next record? That one was okay, but what's next? This is what you did for me yesterday. What are you going to do for me today and tomorrow and the next day? And so the ego is on a treadmill. So a realization has to hit home that it's in my interest to negate my ego rather than to try to affirm it. It's that shift of motivation that will determine your destiny. You affirm the ego, then you're in the ego, and the ego becomes your reality, and it's a reality peppered with traumas and with self-sabotage and with neediness and dependency and et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to belabor the point. So only the negation of the ego. No, there is no ego, just as there is no mountain or rivers for the Zen student who finally gets it, that this is a dream and it's all just information, and even time is an illusion and space. This is a holographic image in the mind. I'm not really in it. I'm not in the body. The body is part of the dream field that I have imagined. And when I can see that behind it there is light and there is an intelligence that is able to awaken from the dream and modify the egoic structure, but also be free entirely of the predicate that binds your identity to the body and thus makes you feel mortal and have to suffer the aging, the death of the body, and all of the vicissitudes and suffering that the body is heir to. So the negation, that crucial second step of the dialectic, is where the resistance stops the process. But if you're willing to go into that and say, no, there is no ego. I was never this character. I am just pure awareness. I was aware of this character, but I'm the same awareness now as I was then. And when the character's mental apparatus was formed, and then different layers were added to it, But that apparatus is obsolete. It belongs to an infant. It doesn't belong to an adult. But somehow I never went through the rite of passage to eliminate that no longer serviceable mental program that is not subtle enough and nuanced enough and profound enough to navigate through life successfully. The ego is not intelligent enough because it has a sensor that censors most of your intelligence and gives you the illusion you have freedom of will, but you don't, because the ego determines what you want. You can't want anything that your ego doesn't want you to want. So in the negation there is freedom, but at the expense of not knowing who you are. So that's the problem with the second phase. I know who I'm not, but I don't yet know who I am. And the terror of depersonalization becomes the second obstacle, right? And only when you get to the third step, in which you can again say, I am, because you recognize, yes, I am. I am presence. I am awareness. But I'm not what I am aware of, and I am not the thinking apparatus of the body that I thought I was. I am awareness that has never been born. And that world that was born with the ego, I am no longer in, and I recognize it as a fantasy projection. And now I can be what I really am. The third step is what Ramana called the aham. I am I, but I'm not it. I'm not the body. I'm not that. I'm not this person. I'm not some entity within the field. I am that all-containing and all-saturating intelligence that is producing the field. And in that, I am, it includes what had been the ego. The ego is not dissolved entirely because the all-containing non-duality of the real self is the non-duality of duality and non-duality. So I can live as a bodily being, but no longer the ego. But the I am becomes an avatar in the body. And then divine life begins. And it's divine life that makes life worth living, not human ego life. It's that vibrational frequency that is only attained through going through the negation of the ego and the openness to the infinite, spaciousness, and the subtlety of the vibrational energies that underlie space and time, that bring the bliss, the Satchitananda, into full emergence from its primordially repressed dungeon. And then the journey is over when that dialectic is complete. But the divine celebration begins. Life becomes a true celebration of one's genius, of one's powers of mastery, of one's ability to understand everything, and all of the wisdom of the real self becomes accessible, and all of its latent powers that the ego cannot reach. So this transformation makes all the difference in the kind of life that you lead. But you have to have the courage and the strength and the understanding of the need to negate the ego as one's real self, and to let it disappear, so that you can be for real in the space of consciousness, free of an I thought. Because only in that freedom are you able to realize what you are. As long as you are subject to the ego's thoughts, and you still allow the ego to impersonate you, so you think its thoughts are your thoughts, then you're trapped. You've put yourself in bondage. And the ego's paranoia and anxieties and all of that will hold you as its prisoner. But it's all an illusion, and there's nothing to fear. So why not be free? Anyway, that's what yoga is about. And it is this structure, this dynamic of the thesis and the antithesis, if you wish, the negation, and then the denouement of the revelation of the negation, and the real I amness becoming fully recognized as yourself. This is the moment when the lightning bolt strikes. And because there is only the self, and the ego is an illusion, and even the soul at level 2 of the negation, because that's where that happens, the soul is that level of consciousness that knows it's not the ego, and then has adoration for its real self, because its heart is open in chakra 4, and its wisdom is open in chakra 5, and that adoration unifies the soul with the spirit, with the self, and that unity then dissolves any remaining karma. It can all happen in a moment if one is willing to recognize the negation of the ego as true. Because once you realize the ego is fictional, then all of its doubts, its problems, its symptoms of suffering, all of that have nothing to hold on to, no ground, no reality. They can't influence you anymore. They can't trap you. You can laugh at them. You are no longer subject to its belief system. So it's this triadic logical form that will get you to freedom instantaneously if you recognize the truth of all three immediately. And everyone has the intelligence to do that. And the only question is, am I willing to give up my attachment to that identity, knowing it's the source of my suffering, and it will not bring me happiness, even though it promises to do that. It can't. So once that is clear, then you realize there are no obstacles except what you create and hold on to. And none of the ego's attacks upon your goodness, your worthiness, your divinity, your intelligence, your worthiness to be divinized and completely liberated, none of its doubts and self-attacks will be able to reach you or have any influence. None of its thoughts and emotions can create disturbance any longer. And all those symptoms of the ego's inner conflicts will simply dissolve. And once you know who you are and you have access to your real will and your real intelligence and your real heart, life becomes beautiful. Infinitely beautiful, not just as a beautiful hope for the future, but beautiful now and in every moment. So, that's the teaching. Now, it's nothing new, so I doubt that anyone is shocked by this. It's simply, again, a short summary of what everyone already knows. But I want to put it tonight into the context of what's going on in the apparently mad world that we're in, because it's the same structure. And it's a very beautiful example of Shiva's sense of humor and of the nuances and levels of intelligence that the ego, because of its projections and wishful thinking, cannot see, or cannot see in time to stop itself from being harmed or affected or detoured or in some way deviated from its real goal and from its empowered understanding of how to move successfully through the unfolding drama of the world. Because once you're in your real self, you see the world from the level of the implicate order, no longer the explicate order. And the implicate order is present, all present now. It's not in a linear future so that, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. The implicate order gives an understanding of a much larger event horizon in which the clarity of the destiny of that unfoldment becomes much more transparent, and one can see around the arc of time. So the recent events are in the political realm in the world, particularly between Russia and NATO, are an example of the alchemical principle of as above, so below, or as in the internal consciousness, so in the external, and what is happening in the microcosm of the ego is happening in the macrocosm. And I've already talked about how this is a time of mutiny, and mutiny is the theme of the current part of God's theme park that we're all going through and enjoying the rides on. And we've just been treated to a wonderful little ride over the last 24, 48 hours for those who were, watching with bated breath, this performance that was going on. It was the most brilliant military ruse, I think, that was ever put over by any military national organization. Napoleon didn't manage this, Hitler didn't manage it, Stalin, Clausewitz, even Sun Tzu would have bowed, I think, to Putin over this one. So let's go back to the original understanding of what was happening this week, all right? Because most of the commentators that I've checked online still don't get it. And they were all fooled, even the ones who, should have known better, were all fooled by this. So let's go back and see how it must have unfolded knowing that the Russians have incredible intelligence gathering capacities, not just human intelligence. They have it much better than the West has on Russia, but also the cyber hacking and satellite spying and all kinds of managing to infiltrate and pick up the messages that are being secretly sent among the enemy without them knowing that you picked it up, right? That's the basic job of the intelligence division, right? So the Russians clearly knew months ago that the West was planning to use this air defender war game as a possibility of making it go live and them doing this all-out air invasion of Russia and hoping to wipe them out in a first strike by a surprise attack. And Russia clearly knew this already because they had the plan this months ahead and bring this whole exercise into being and prepare all the vassal states to be ready and to refurbish jet planes, et cetera. So a huge logistical process was underway, and they were able to detect all of it. So what they did was they created a new Richard III, okay, named Prigozhin. And first they make him this heroic warrior hero, but then you see gradually he gets more and more unhappy with the bosses in the military and the Ministry of Defense. And eventually he's coming out and calling them the worst names possible. You know, nobody does this and gets away with it in any army. But he gets away with it, well, because he's a hero and he's indispensable and we can't do without him, right? And all of that. So he gets away with the most insulting statements and accusations. We're not getting any ammo. You're not defending us. And then later there's even a crazy general who put mines behind us so we can't retreat. And then you even bombed our people, right? So it gets higher and higher levels of antagonism to the Russian government, and he builds up his credibility as somebody who might be turned, right, to change sides because he's so angry. And he's got so much power because he's leading this invincible Wagner force, you know, that is all conquering. So when he's in Bakhmut, right, fighting this battle, he's collecting a lot of prisoners of war. Some that he's actually capturing from their positions and command posts that have been surrounded. Others who are simply surrendering voluntarily and wanting to be out of it. So he's got a huge group of prisoners, some of whom are probably very high NATO officers. They're probably Brits or Germans, right? And so he calls the highest officer in and he says, I'm going to let you go back to NATO command. I'm going to sneak you out of here. But I want you to give this letter to the high mucky muck who's making the decisions. And the letter says, I'm willing to change sides. I can lead a coup against Russia. I can win it, I'm sure. If you'll give me the backing, then I'll do it. And they say, of course, well, prove it, do it. And he says, okay, but it'll take me time, and I can't do it until about the last day of your air exercise. Right? So now they are waiting to see, do we go? Do we do this World War III attack that might actually lose and we all die? Or do we hope that our most cherished wet dream is that Russia will come apart and there will be a coup and somebody will take over who will surrender and we'll split Russia up into different blocks and we'll get all the wealth and we win, and then we defeat China after that, right? So here's the opportunity, right? I'm sure they're all salivating over this and saying, go for it. And so on that last day, but right at the end of their opportunity to go live, yes, the coup is on. The evidence comes in. And there's even fake news. Lukashenko has fled from Belarus. Putin has fled. They don't know where he is. Airplanes are being shot down and helicopters. It's all fake, but they believe it because Russia controls the space. And Wagner's troops come in and conquer all of Rostov, you know. They occupy this Russian city, you know. And now they're moving to Voronezh, and their convoy is going up to Moscow. Oh, my God. And then you see Putin giving this, I've never seen Putin like this, a brilliant performance. He actually looks scared. Like, we don't know what's going to happen, but treason is really bad, you know, and we've got to stop this guy somehow. I mean, they could have bombed him in 2 seconds anywhere. They know where he is. They have precision missiles. They bombed the leaders of the Ukrainian army already. They can't bomb this guy. No, we can't touch him, you know. And then you get former prime ministers and others from Russia saying, we don't know what's going to happen, but probably he's going to end up taking over the government, you know. And all of these rumors are put out, and NATO people again, yes, okay. So they let the exercise end, and the planes then have to fly back to their bases, and they lost their opportunity to do this. And in the meantime, under the cover of this, he's moving all troops into total readiness so that if there is an attack, they will now be able to knock down all the planes and win possibly a World War III, even though Putin doesn't want to fight it. But they're ready. And in addition, they've moved under the cover of this anti-Prigozhin thing, more and more troops to the border of Ukraine, so that now they are ready to do the big blitzkrieg. And I would bet in the next couple of days, they enter Ukraine from Belarus, from Russia, from Donbass, from all over, and they end this thing. And the West has lost its opportunity, and they're in shock with egg on their face, and they got taken, right? So it's a brilliant performance, and it gives us a reprieve from the end of the world, okay? So we owe that to Putin, I think, although Shiva, I'm sure, was responsible for his, getting that idea. But it was brilliantly performed. They have these incredible crisis actors in Rostov running from, bombs and all of that.